When the Minnesota Vikings released star running back Dalvin Cook earlier in the month, a lot of Vikings fans were big mad at general manager adofo-mensah because they're like, hey, Dalvin, 4 straight Pro Bowls, 4 straight 1,000-yard seasons. You should have been able to get something in trade compensation. And maybe some of the perspectives has changed because early in the offseason, I mean, fans were saying, don't settle for less than a first for Dalvin. And then a second rounder, then a third rounder, then a whatever. But ultimately, the Vikings did end up releasing Dalvin for nothing. They do have $2 million guaranteed on his contract, which can offset if and when he does sign with another team. But Kwesi, stood by how he wants to rebuild this team and ultimately gave Dalvin Cook his release versus a trade. And I mean, all the trade rumors were there. All the speculation, him on Miami, all that makes sense even before they drafted Devin Kane, even after. I think that reportedly Dalvin does have an offer on the table from multiple teams, including one from the Dolphins. So that does make sense why they would have been interested in Dalvin earlier in the offseason. Lots of reports. Doogie was all up in there. A lot of National Smokies were on the case as well of Dalvin to the Dolphins, all of that stuff, right? But ESPN's Jeff Darlington, he let something slip a little bit where they were having a conversation about Dalvin, where he's going to end up. Talk about him in the Jets, talk about him in the Dolphins, etc. And Darlington just sort of slipped this in there as a non sequitur aside. He said this, quote, the Miami Dolphins were one of 2 teams that were willing to trade for Dalvin Cook earlier this offseason, ultimately couldn't get the compensation right now. A lot of Vikings fans read this and just get mad right away. It's like, oh, Kwesi screwed this up, blah, 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 blah. But how I read this is, a trade offer was in place, or they ultimately couldn't get the compensation right. But it's not like Kwesi was going to turn down a draft pick, because guess what? The Vikings would have had the same cap savings plus $2 million, because that $2 million guaranteed would be off the books right now as opposed to waiting for 2024. But you really think that Kwesi would turn down a 7th-round pick if it was on the table for Dalvin, or let alone a 6th, a 5th, or a 4th, whatever? He's not turned down 2nd-round picks for Dalvin Cook, so that ain't that situation. But what this leads me to believe, in terms of the wording, ultimately couldn't get the compensation right, because if there was any compensation, the Vikings would have taken it, as opposed to releasing Dalvin, even though they said they wanted to do right by him. But, I mean, I think what would have happened is, because if a team was trading for Dalvin Cook, they would have had to take on this contract absent renegotiation, but that would have taken more steps. But I think what would have happened is that teams were willing to trade for Dalvin Cook, probably not much, probably a late day 3 selection, maybe a 6th, maybe a 7th, maybe even a 5th, but they wanted the Vikings to take on some of that $10.4 million. And I think that's where the Vikings drew the line. I think the Vikings, the reason that they parted with Dalvin Cook was to save cap space, and they would have had him back at a lower number. And it's a spot where did Kwesi really want to buy, quote unquote, buy a 6th or 7th round pick for a couple million in cap space? Probably not. Probably not at this stage, where the Vikings do have to budget for extensions for Jefferson and TJ, maybe Daniil, maybe Kirk Cousins, maybe Christian Darrisaw next offseason too. So I think that's where this ended up, where, like I said, Kwesi's not an idiot. So, yeah, you get out of here with all the nonsense. So, I mean, if there was a firm offer on the table, like if the Dolphins came in and said, hey, we'll give you a 6th-round pick for Dalvin straight up, no offset language, no picking up part of his pay packet, no, he would have done it, obviously. But I think, again, what the wording, what this says, ultimately couldn't get the compensation right. I think what it comes down to is, like I said, if there was anything on the table, the Vikings would have taken it. But if there was some conditions where the Vikings would get a late-round pick, but they had to pick up some of his $10.4 million salary, I think that's where it was. And I think that's where the Vikings ultimately decided to release him, get the cap savings now, as well as, since it's likely he's going to be signed before the start of the season, be able to offset that $2 million that was fully guaranteed on his deal, and go from there. But also, the larger question is, who is the second team? And you're looking at the teams that could be in on Dalvin Cook. I mean, could it have been the Broncos, even though they're sort of behind the 8 ball in terms of draft picks because of the Russ trade and also cap space? But, jumping George Payton in power there in Denver, was the assistant GM for the Vikings when they drafted Dalvin in 2017. Could have been the Jets. Could have been the Cowboys. Could have been the Browns, looking to team up Dalvin with Nick Chubb, replacing Kareem Hunt. Could have made some sense. What about the Commies, or et cetera? But I don't know. I guess it ultimately doesn't matter. who the second team was, or, I mean, details could emerge. I mean, just follow the money, find out which teams are showing the most interest in Dalvin Cook at this stage. If a team got to the stage where they're talking about offering draft picks, that's pretty damn serious. But I guess we'll see, man. But again, super interesting the way this broke down. But again, don't be mad at Kwesi. It's not like you turned down draft picks, so get out of here. Get out of here, man. Anyways, your thoughts are thoughts. The Minnesota Vikings reportedly had 2 dose trade offers for Dalvin Cook, but let us know your thoughts and our thoughts in the comment section below. Subscribe for daily Vikings takes. Want to support the work? Put a little something in the Venmo. But next time, Skol, production value.